Hey everybody, welcome back to the Maker's Gonna Learn YouTube channel. My name's Alicia and today I'm gonna be showing you guys a really fun craft. We're gonna be sewing and we're gonna be cutting fabric with our Cricut. If you're new to the Cricut world, there are a lot of cool different things, different types of blades that you can do with your Cricut machine. Cutting fabric is one of my favorites just because the cuts are so clean and we're using like a miniature rotary blade. So if you're familiar with sewing at all, you probably use a rotary cutter to actually cut your fabric. But the Cricut's gonna do it for us today. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys everything you need to get started. So to start off, you're obviously gonna need some fabrics. Now these are just like cotton fabrics. I got these at Hobby Lobby. You can use what you have on hand, or if you're making it for someone, maybe see what kind of colors they would like. But you're gonna need like an outer pattern and then an inner lining. These are my colors. They coordinate together. I thought that terrazzo pattern was super cute. I've got these little sewing clips. If you all have been using sewing pins and you've never tried sewing clips, these are a game changer. Y'all need to invest in these. They're so much easier and they come in different sizes, so you can clip your fabric together. But I do have some sewing pins here as well. And then I've got our rotary blade. So this is similar to like a rotary cutter you would use to cut fabric, except it's teeny tiny and we're gonna put it inside of our Cricut. I've got a pair of big scissors as well as these tiny scissors for when we actually start sewing. I'm using a brayer. This is for when we apply the fabric to our mat. I've got a spatula, a seam ripper, and then a pencil. And then I've got some of these stick-on squares. These are just Velcro squares. You can get the ones where you just cut them. Just something to where we're gonna be able to connect our strap across whenever we complete our trash bag. I've got heat and bond as well as vinyl matte fuse. So heat and bond is going to allow us to add some embellishments on the bag. This matte vinyl fuse is in order to make the inner lining of our trash bag waterproof, you're gonna need this. Now, you could use oilcloth if you wanted to. You could also use like that nylon polyester material that they use like on windbreakers, or any type of like waterproof material is gonna be nice so that you can wipe it clean. But if you have a specific cotton fabric that you wanna use, you can just cover it with this matte vinyl fuse and it makes it virtually waterproof. Really, it just makes it a lot easier to clean. And then you're also gonna need a mini press or just an iron. I use this mini press for everything, so I'm gonna be using that today. You're gonna need a 24-inch fabric grip mat for this. Now, if you only have a 12-inch mat, you could technically like cut your pieces in half. So I'm gonna give you guys the exact measurements you're gonna need, but you will have to actually stitch your pieces together. If you're a more experienced sewer, that shouldn't be like too big of a deal. But the 24-inch mat is going to give us more of a seamless look. But you could achieve the same thing with a 12-inch mat if you really wanted to. You are going to need a sewing machine as well as a Cricut, and I'm using the Maker 3 today. Now that we have all of our supplies, let's hop into Design Space and I'm gonna show you guys how to lay this out before we actually cut our fabric. Okay, now that we're in Design Space, what we're gonna do is start by laying out our biggest pieces of fabric. So we're gonna be cutting squares. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that shape in and make sure it's unlocked. And up here in our measurements, I'm going to type in 11 by 20.5. So 11 by 20.5, and I'm gonna zoom out. So we've got this rectangle shape. We're gonna be cutting this 3 times. So we're gonna be cutting the outer fabric with this size, the inner fabric, and we're also going to be cutting the matte vinyl fuse. Now, you can adhere the matte vinyl fuse before you cut it. I will actually do that so you guys can see it that way, or you can cut it just alone. And then we are going to need one piece of a 4x14 from our outer fabric. So that terrazzo fabric that I have, I'm gonna go ahead and pull in another square. I'm going to unlock it. And this one is gonna be 4 inches wide by 14 tall. Now this seems really thick for a strap, but we're going to be folding it up and pressing it so that it looks like a nice clean strap. Now that we have our shapes, let's go to Make It. We're going to select On Mat, and it's automatically going to put us at a 12 by 24 inch mat because we made our square so big. And I'm going to go ahead and select Continue. We're using the Maker 3. Then you're going to browse all materials, and we are going to type in cotton, and you can do it on default pressure. I've cut with the Maker on default pressure, and it was perfectly fine with the rotary blade. The Maker 3, I typically have to do more pressure, so I'm going to go ahead and change that and make sure I've got my rotary blade installed, and then we will send it through the Cricut. Okay, so before I put this on the mat, I want to make sure everything is pressed really well. It's been folded up, so I'm going to run this little mini press over where we've got some of our wrinkles and make sure everything is ironed out really nicely. Okay, so I'm just going to lay this on over top of our fabric, and I'm going to take the scissors and just kind of loosely cut all the way around, and then I'm going to pull this fabric up here, and I'm going to kind of trim it up, that way it doesn't get caught up in the Cricut. But I'm going to line this top edge here and the long edge, kind of pull it taut, and you can take your brayer here and go over it to make sure it's super smoothed out. If you've never used a fabric grip mat before, then you might not know this, but these fabric grip mats are so sticky. I think they're more sticky than like a strong grip mat. They're very, very sticky, especially if they're brand new. So if you get the brayer on here, it's gonna stay really well whenever you go to cut it. Just make sure that if there are any wrinkles, you're kind of pulling them out as you go. Okay, and then you can see along this top edge, there's a little bit of extra fabric. I'm just gonna go ahead and trim that. And then there's some over here on the bottom. I'm gonna trim that up as well. You just wanna make sure it's within the guideline parameters on the mat where the numbers are. You wanna be inside of that square. And then I'm just gonna braid this back down. And you guys can see this corner right here, you can kind of see that there's like an area showing. So I'm gonna send it through the Cricut from this top edge. That way, whenever it goes to cut, I know that this fabric comes all the way to the corner and we're not gonna have any like weird jagged edges. Make sure to change out your fine point blade before you go ahead to cut your Cricut. So I've got my rotary blade right here. Just gonna put that in. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull this off. Okay, so once you pull it off the Cricut, it may look like it didn't really cut, but once you start pulling it up, you'll be able to see that it did. And there may be a couple areas that might have snagged a little bit. You can just take your scissors and kind of snip those. Even those little scissors are really good for this part. If you've got little scissors, if you've got big ones only, that is totally fine. So once you remove the outer edge, you can go ahead and remove this fabric. I'm gonna go ahead and take a piece of that terrazzo fabric from our excess fabric, and I'm going to lay it on here. So it needs to be at least 4 by 14 because that's how big our strap is. So I'm just gonna cut this, and I'm gonna cut this end off. And listen, you could have cut this by hand. You can cut fabric by hand all day, every day, but the Cricut just makes it look so clean. Like you can even see, this is my scissor cut. This is my cut with the rotary blade. So like obviously it looks so much better, but this is just like a fun way to utilize your Cricut in another way that you may not have thought of before. And I just think it looks so clean. I love a good clean line whenever I'm sewing. It makes everything go together so much better. So I'm just gonna braid this down. We're gonna be cutting the 4 by 14 square on the same cotton settings, and we're still gonna do more pressure just to make sure that it cuts all the way through. Let's go ahead and send this to the Cricut. Okay, now that that's cut out, we're just gonna go ahead and nip any places that might have stayed connected. And there is our strap piece. So before we cut the inner lining fabric, I'm gonna go ahead and apply this matte vinyl fuse to the fabric, and then we'll cut it all together. You could cut the matte vinyl fuse first and also cut this like separately if you wanted to. But I'm gonna go ahead and iron it on and then cut it all at once. I did go ahead and cut a piece of this matte vinyl fuse that's gonna be a little bit bigger than the piece of fabric that we're cutting. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay out our fabric. And you wanna make sure that you press this really well. So I'm gonna make sure to press this down really well before we go to adhere the matte vinyl fuse. If you've never used matte vinyl fuse before, which I was not super familiar with it before I used it for this project, but there's step-by-step instructions. I ripped them a little bit, but you can get the idea. Obviously, there's like 2 layers. Whenever you open it, you'll be able to tell that there are layers to it. But basically what it's telling us is you're going to use the medium heat setting, which I've got mine set to that. Remove the vinyl fuse from the release paper and place the sticky side down onto the fabric. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can tell this is sticky and this is more like a smooth matte finish. And I'm just going to lay this down here. And I'm going to take my brayer just to make sure that it's down really good. Now this needs to go on the side of the fabric that you want to be showing on your inner lining. So this is the side that I want showing on my inner lining. So if I had a pattern fabric, like if I was using that terrazzo fabric on the inside, I would use this side up. So I would actually stick this like it would be this pattern side looking at me as I ironed it on. Make sure you don't have any threads or anything like that on it. And then you're gonna take the paper that we just removed and lay it back on top of here, and we're gonna iron over top of all of it. I'm just gonna slowly work my way down to make sure that this adheres to the entire piece of fabric. And you can check as you go to make sure that it's going on smoothly and that you're not missing anything as well. We just don't want to iron directly on to the vinyl because it can melt it. And then once you've got that on there, you can go ahead and cut out all the way around. If you need to use your mat as kind of a guideline, you can do that as well. And then after you cut it, if you see any spots that have kind of lifted, just take that piece of paper and run the iron over it to make sure it's adhered very well. I'm gonna cut this with the bonded side up. So whenever you put it on your mat, make sure you've got this adhesive facing up to you. And I'm gonna go ahead and line this up, and then I'm gonna trim around the edges so it doesn't get caught in our machine. Okay, so what we're gonna do is go back to this one. We're gonna be using the same measurements here, but we are gonna be using a different cut setting. So let's go to Browse All Materials, and we're gonna be doing light cotton 2 layers. I'm gonna go ahead and select Done, and we're gonna do more pressure, and then we are going to send this to the Cricut. And then before you actually take the fabric off of the mat, go ahead and just make sure and see if it cut all the way through. Mine almost did, but I'm gonna run it through another pass just to make sure it cuts super clean. Okay, now that that's cut out, we're gonna go ahead and take off this excess fabric. If it's still caught in some areas, you can take your scissors. I just grabbed a True Control knife because I feel like it's helping me really get there a lot quicker and just kind of cut off where there's tiny bits that are still connected. Most of this pretty well cut though. Okay, and then you're gonna go ahead and pull that off. And now we've got all of the pieces that we need to make our trash bag. So we've got our inner piece, our outer lining, and then we have our strap piece. Now that we've got all of our pieces cut, let's go ahead and get our sewing machine ready to put the pieces together. Okay, so before we get started sewing, what we're gonna do first is take our outer fabric and we're gonna fold the outer side of the fabric, so the non-pattern side. You guys can see, this is my pattern side, this is the back. So I need to be looking at the back, and I'm just gonna match those shorter edges up together. If you want to, you can pin this I'm gonna use these little clips just to hold it, but all we're gonna be doing is sewing up these edges. So we're gonna sew all the way up and down, and we're gonna repeat this process for our inner fabric as well, and I'll walk you guys through that also. Let's go ahead and pin these and then sew up each edge. So these pieces all have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I've got it lined up with the 1/4 inch. I'm gonna go ahead and put the foot down and put the sewing needle in. And I'm just gonna pull this a little bit taut and go ahead and sew all the way down each side. Okay, so we've got this first edge sewn, and I'm gonna do the same thing over here. I also have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side. Now I'm just trimming up any loose threads just to keep everything super neat and clean. Okay, so what you'll have now is basically an open little pouch, and it's gonna be sewn up both of these edges, and we're gonna repeat the same process for the inner lining. So for the inner lining, you're gonna put the waterproof material on the inside. So we're gonna fold the waterproof part so that it's touching each other. And I'm just gonna line up that top edge, and then you can take your clips and pin this along the sides. And we're gonna sew this exactly like we sewed the first piece. This will also have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And where the fabric is a little bit thicker, you might want to slow down when you're sewing, just to avoid breaking any needles or messing up. Again, I'm just gonna cut off any excess threads just to keep everything nice and clean. And then you'll have the similar situation that you did with the first one. It's just like a little pouch, and you'll have that waterproof lining on the inside. I didn't mention this earlier. I guess I just assumed everyone already had some type of measuring tape on hand, but you are gonna need this. We measured everything in Design Space, but for this particular step, we're just gonna be needing to measure our corners. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take a pencil and our little measuring tape. I'm gonna open these this way so you can see that those two seams are touching. And what I'm gonna do is take these points and flatten them out. So it's gonna be kind of like a triangle right here. And I'm gonna measure 1.5 inches from this point, and I'm gonna make a mark with my pencil. So we're gonna take all the way to the tip, and then there's 1.5 inch mark right there. And then you can lay this across and just kind of draw a mark. We're gonna be sewing right here, so just kind of mark it off. We're gonna repeat that on this corner as well, and we're gonna do it for the orange fabric also. Okay, and now we're gonna take these to the sewing machine and sew right across each of those lines. Now that we've got these drawn on, I'm gonna go ahead and pin them just so they stay in place better when we go to sew. And this, I'm using actual sewing pins to pin this part. And now we're just gonna sew along those lines with the sewing machine. And then once you've sewn those corners, we're gonna go ahead and obviously snip any excess thread, but I'm also going to cut the triangles off of the edges. So I'm going out about 1/2 inch, and I'm just gonna trim that off. We're gonna do the same thing with our outer fabric. Okay, so once you've cut those edges, you're gonna end up with this type of situation. This is like a little bag. We're already starting to see, like, this was so quick, and I feel like we're starting to really see like the formation of the bag. So I'm gonna keep my inner lining fabric the same direction, but I'm gonna flip this one so that it's right side out now. And you can make sure and push those corners out really well. If you need to take like a weeding tool or some kind of sharp mechanism to point those corners out, you can do that. And next we're gonna work on our strap, and then we'll come back to this. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna take our strap fabric, I'm gonna flip it over, and we're gonna fold this long ways, just like this. I have my little mini press on, and I'm going to press this. Just make sure that it is square, otherwise when we go to sew, it's gonna be off and it will bother you if you don't make it perfectly square. So we're just gonna make sure those long edges stay lined up, and I'm gonna press this all the way up. And then I'm gonna open this back up, and I'm just gonna fold one of these raw edges in. Make sure if there's any strings, you're just cutting it off as you go. I'm just gonna fold that in just a little bit. I'm gonna press that down. And then what I'm gonna do is fold the halves in half. So I'm gonna fold this side in half and press it. So I'm gonna bring it right there to the middle. And then I'm gonna repeat on the other side. And then I'm gonna just fold it back again and re-press it down that middle line just to make sure it is really pressed. The better you press it, the easier it's gonna be for you to sew. And then what we're gonna do now that it's pressed, I've got the raw edge right here. I'm gonna start there, and I'm gonna sew all the way down this edge. I'm gonna sew right here. I'm not gonna come off. So I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna come close to the bottom, but not all the way. I'll turn it, sew across, and turn it again, and sew all the way back up off of that back edge. So I'm not gonna go all the way to the edge where we folded over that top hem and pressed it. I'm not gonna go past that edge. What I'm gonna do, I've got the needle in there now, but I need it a little bit closer to the edge, just not all the way. So I'm just gonna turn it a couple times. Actually, I just needed to turn it one time. I'm gonna lift my foot up, and I'm just gonna pull this right here. So it's still connected to the sewing machine. The needle is still through it, and I'll put my foot right back down, and I can keep sewing straight across. But I don't wanna go too far, because I don't wanna go all the way to the edge. So once you get close, you can kind of stop using your foot pedal, and you can use the manual knob. And then I'm just gonna lift my foot pedal, turn it again, and put it back down, and I'm gonna sew all the way to the bottom edge where we started. And then we're just gonna snip off any of this excess, and our strap is nearly complete. Okay, so we've got our strap done, and you all can see here how it's just squared off rather than on the raw end. It just kind of goes off the edges. You're not going to be seeing this, so it's not going to matter. But what we're going to do is take that raw end, and we're going to line it up to the raw edge of our outer lining. If you want, you can measure from the sides to the side. Like if you wanted it to be, let's see where it's at, because I like what it looks like right there. So this is like, let's do 2.5. So that way, whenever we go to connect this side later, we can measure 2.5 from this side and make sure that we've got it lined up. So it's like perfectly symmetrical. So let's double check our measurement. I want this to be from the edge. I want it to be 2.5. Okay. And then what we're gonna do is just add a stitch right here just to connect this strap. So we're not going all the way around, just where the strap is. Okay, so you're gonna end up with something like this. It's just gonna be hanging down. It's gonna look weird, but we're gonna put it together. What I'm gonna do next is take the inner lining, and I am going to tuck the outer lining inside of it. So I know it gets a little confusing. We're using inner and outer interchangeably, but I tuck the strap is in there and everything. So I'm lining these up seam to seam. I'm gonna go ahead and pin that. Now you can use regular pins, you can use clips, whatever you are more comfortable with. And then I'm gonna line this one up as well. I really like the clips, especially for materials like the inner lining, because sometimes the pins will scar the fabric. And so these little clips help without puncturing the fabric, so you can't really tell that there was pins there in the first place. And then I'm just gonna pin all the way around as well as I can. And now I'm just going to sew all the way around this top edge very carefully. I will sew all the way around, but I am gonna leave a small opening, like a 4-inch opening probably, just somewhere so that we can turn this right side out. So I'll probably just put like a little gap right here, and then we can turn it right side out after we're done, and then we'll close that hole. I'm also gonna take off this little piece. It helps so I can kind of rotate my fabric around. You don't have to do that, but it's just easier for me to sew that way. And then I can pull it up onto this little arm and kind of sew from there. Again, this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just gonna slowly pull all this fabric out. It may take a minute, just be super careful not to tear your stitches. And I feel like my hole is a little bit small, so I'm gonna take my seam ripper and just get these last couple stitches. That way I've got a little bit more room. Okay, and we can iron this out so it doesn't look so crinkly whenever we're actually using it, but I feel like it actually kind of looks like pleather or like a distressed leather. It looks pretty cool. So what you're gonna do, it's gonna look weird and like this. I'm gonna tuck this back into the outer fabric. And you're just gonna push it all the way down. Make sure the corners completely fill out. Okay. And then really we've got to add this top stitch, and that'll get our bag portion pretty much completed. And then we've got a couple finishing touches, but we are making good progress. Before I sew this edge, I'm gonna take the mini press and just kind of iron it down a little bit just to kind of smooth things out. Just be careful not to melt that vinyl matte fuse. And you can see right here is where I have that hole, but we're about to fix that. I'm gonna go ahead and press it just a little bit, and then I am going to pin it. And I'm gonna pin this all the way around to add the top stitch. Okay. And then we're just gonna add that all the way around. Whenever you're sewing this part, make sure you pull that strap out and don't actually sew it again, because it may still be tucked inside of your bag. So just make sure to pull it out. And then you've got your top stitch all the way around. So we only have a couple more things to do, and then we will be done. What you're gonna do next is you're gonna take a piece of Velcro. So you'll have like the scratchy side and the softer side. We're gonna need one of each. I'm just gonna cut this off. And then what we're gonna do, this is basically going to connect back here. And earlier we measured from the edges to where to put this. So what I'm gonna do is measure from this seam, and I'm gonna measure to 2.5, and I am going to put one of the pieces of Velcro right there at that 2.5 mark. And this is on the back side. The Velcro is going to allow you to easily remove and install the bag whenever you need to change it. You can also just put like a Walmart bag or something like that in it. That way you can just take it in and out, and you don't actually have to remove the entire trash bag. But this does make it a little bit easier. And these are sticky. So what we're going to do is add a stitch on it, but I'm going to add Velcro to this side of the strap. So we've got the strap right here. and I'm just pulling it straight down, and I'm gonna add Velcro right there. And I'm gonna add a simple stitch on this as well so that it doesn't come off. Okay, so initially I was gonna sew these, but whenever I went to sew it, the needle going through the tackiness on the back of the Velcro, it messes the needle up. It kind of bogs it up and it doesn't wanna sew. So what I'm gonna do is just take these off and put a little piece of fabric glue on the back of them, and they should adhere just fine. So I've got this flexible, stretchable fabric glue. This is permanent fabric adhesive. I'm just going to lift this up and apply a little bit underneath, just a dot. And then I'm gonna do it to this piece as well. You could also do a button. That would be really cute. So this is totally up to you. We're gonna let that dry for a minute. And while that dries, we're gonna hop into Design Space and we're gonna add a cute little monogram on the front of this. Okay, back in Design Space, I'm just gonna move these out of the way. We can even hide them. I'm gonna add in a monogram. So we have a font called Click Clack, and it's like a typewriter font. It is so cute. We're just gonna do 3 capital initials. So once that is there, I'm gonna just change this font, and you can use whatever font. If you're more of like a script, you could use a script font. You could do a full name, would be cute. And let's do this. Let's look at our trash bag and see how big we need to make it, depending on where we wanna put it. And we'll just measure out where we're gonna be placing it to make sure we don't make it too big or too small. So I was gonna put it like on the bottom right corner. I feel like we don't want it to go all the way across, but you could put it anywhere. Like you could put it right here in the middle. You could put it on the top center even. You could do just like one big letter on there. There's lots of opportunities to make this super cute. But I think I'm gonna try to keep it about 4.5 inches. So I'm gonna make a box in Design Space that's 4.5 inches long, and then we're gonna fit the text inside that box. Okay, I'm gonna pull up the shapes. I'm going to unlock this and make it 4.5. And then we just wanna make sure that our letters don't go any wider than that. We almost had it perfect. And then we can delete our square. And we are gonna cut this out of orange fabric, but not before we apply heat and bond to the back. That way these letters are gonna permanently adhere to the fabric that they are on. Okay, now that our bag is sewn, what I'm gonna do is apply a fabric applique letter to the front of it. You could use HTV for this, which I think would be super cute and pretty quick, but I like the vibe of like having the fabric on the fabric. I feel like it's gonna look really good quality. So if you have a 12-inch mat sitting around, go ahead and grab that. And what we're gonna do is apply some heat and bond to the back of our fabric. Now this is basically, it will adhere to this fabric and then it will adhere to another fabric. So it basically makes like an adhesive on the back of whatever that you put it on. So I'm gonna go ahead and just cut off a small piece of this. And I've got my iron on right now, so it's nice and toasty. And I'm gonna cut off a piece of this fabric, and then we're gonna take this. So this is like a ridged side. It's kind of textured. You're just gonna lay this on your fabric, and we're just gonna take the iron and we are going to apply heat. And then you'll see that there is a white backing on here. We're gonna peel that off. And you'll be able to see that this has a shiny, it's very shiny. So this part right here is actually going to adhere to our trash bag. I'm gonna go ahead and trim up any of these loose edges just so they're out of the way. And then I'm gonna braid this onto our standard grip mat. You could use a fabric grip mat as well. This is a very sticky standard grip mat that I'm using here, but you could use a fabric grip. And I'm gonna be putting the shiny side up. So I'm putting the heat and bond side up, and we're gonna need to mirror this in Design Space before we cut it. Once you've got your text how you want it, go ahead and select Make It. And remember, we're gonna need to mirror it. I'm gonna select continue, and we are using the Maker 3 today. And then we're going to browse all materials, and I'm just gonna go back to the cotton. Now there is a cotton bonded setting, and we are technically using bonded cotton, but it uses the fine point blade, and I just don't get really good results with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick to my guns. I'm gonna use the cotton setting, and I'm gonna use more pressure using the rotary blade, which we already have installed. So I'm gonna go ahead and send this through the Cricut. Okay, so once those are cut out, you can kind of pull them off the mat, and there may be spots where it didn't cut all the way through. I'm just gonna take my X-Acto knife and kind of separate those. You can use scissors for this as well. Just be super careful. So now that our letters are cut, I'm going to apply them to the bag, and I'm gonna put them in this bottom left corner. And by bottom left, I mean bottom right. So the bottom right corner, I think I'm saying left because there's an L initial, but you guys know what I mean. So bottom right, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually adhere this L, and then I'll do the other two based off of that one. So let's take these off. You just have to apply a little bit of pressure. And then we're gonna line this one up right next to it. And you can kind of hold it up in front of you to make sure that you're doing it right. And then you can just run your finger over and make sure that none of them are loose. And then you can test out your Velcro, make sure it's on there good, and we are completely done. What do you guys think about how it turned out? I am obsessed. I think this is so dang cute and so fun for your car. I mean, super easy for you guys to take this Velcro on and off. So you can put it around your headrest. You could put it around your gear shift. And obviously you can customize the letters that go on this. I feel like if you did these back to back, you could make like 10 of these as gifts for Christmas presents. You could put like little, like I feel like this would be super cute if you were gifting a 16-year-old or something for their car. Could put like air fresheners and cute little things for their car in it. So there's just a lot of different ideas and ways that you can customize this. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed it and were able to follow along and at least learn something new. We've got an amazing online community. We have a Facebook group. We've got a website full of tons of cut files and fonts for you all to use for all of your crafting needs. And we would love for you guys to be a part of our community. Make sure if you aren't already that you subscribe to our channel and click the thumbs up if you like this and hit the little bell so every time that we post, you all will get a notification on your phone, and we cannot wait to see you in the next one. Bye guys.